To understand anyone's actions, you first need to know what drives them. The 47th President Séché requires special attention. Here's a brief but crucial historical context. In June 1956, Major Gamal Abdel Nasser came to power in Egypt following a military coup. Riding a wave of popularity, he decides to nationalize the Suez Canal, which had been built 100 years earlier with French money and was still owned by British and French shareholders. This threatened to seriously harm the interests of London and Paris, which depended on trade routes established with their former colonies. For this reason, a plan was developed for a military invasion of Egypt to overthrow Nasser and take control of this crucial logistical route. To give the intervention a legal appearance, a secret agreement was signed between France, Britain, and Israel. The agreement required Israel to start military action in the Sinai Peninsula to drive Egyptian troops back from the borders. After that, London and Paris were supposed to present themselves as peacekeepers, taking control of the Suez Canal in order to separate the warring sides.
Actually, that's a pretty funny pretext. No one would have ever believed it was true. In reality, it was a kind of political scheme to achieve two possible goals.
Despite this, the plan was initiated. British and French troops swiftly captured key positions, defeating the Egyptians in a well-executed military operation. But then politics came into play. Although Abdel Nasser had started to actively align with the Soviet Union, purchasing arms and accepting funds from Moscow while persistently threatening Israel's destruction, the United States of America sharply opposed the actions of London and Paris, not only condemning the invasion, but also starting financial pressure on their allies.
This is a brutal armed attack by 3 of our members against a 4th. The Americans blocked our request for borrowing rights from the International Monetary Fund. They essentially denied us access to our own money.
In the Cold War context, it appears Washington would favor the collapse of the pro-Soviet regime and having its allies control the key trade artery. However, the White House followed a different reasoning at that time. Apart from not wanting to get drawn into a war with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it was just as important for them to show the world that the United States of America stood for a new, free world order. It's not for nothing that the Suez Crisis is called the last colonial war. And indeed, the world was entering an era when, in order to influence a country, you didn't need to conquer it. It was enough to establish strong economic ties with it. As the largest industrial nation, the states aimed to draw countries into their sphere of influence through trade. This era was called Neocolonialism because, of course, the more powerful state secured more favorable trade terms for itself. Thus, since the mid-20th century, free trade brought significant advantages to the states, since it was Séché that was the leading industrial power, and they were not interested in protectionism. But since China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001, free trade has started to work against America's interests, because open markets contributed to the rise of the Celestial Empire. And of course, the former beneficiary is not satisfied with this.
We should have a surplus, not a deficit.
Because the money I'm talking about, and you can call it, as that gentleman said, a tax, you can call it whatever you want. But these countries should pay us billions of dollars and we won't have a deficit, and then we can help the poor, the sick, the homeless, the farmers, and everyone else.
Despite my long-standing criticism of Trump, I can't say his decisions are illogical. After all, the United States' approach of "it's better to trade than to fight," although of course sometimes you can fight a little, has raised not just a trade competitor who takes away jobs. It allowed a country with an autocratic regime to grow to gigantic proportions. It allowed a regime with an ideological foundation that poses a threat to so-called Western values to gain strength. And of course, something should have been done about this a long time ago. By imposing tariffs on China, even if only partially, Trump is attempting to restore America's global dominance before it is completely lost. Yes, Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," is actually incorrect. "Keep America Great" would be more appropriate, since for now the United States still holds the lead. But the question is, how long will it last? That's why Donald is acting in the right direction. The only problem is that his actions are absolutely idiotic.
If Russia becomes a permanent junior partner to China in the long term, we'll end up with 2 nuclear powers opposed to the United States of America. And even in 10 or 5 years, if this trend continues, we might find ourselves in a situation where Russia can't improve relations with the United States of America because it's completely dependent on China. Because we cut them off. So I don't know if that's good for us. I think it would be better for us to maintain relations.
Yes, it's clear why Trump is trying so hard to hand Ukraine over to Putin, although it's not certain that he'll succeed. And again, Because of his own stupidity, if he hadn't promised in every interview to end the war in 24 hours, there wouldn't be so much attention on this case in the United States of America right now, with Donald being asked at every opportunity, and even when it's not appropriate, what stage is the deal at? And now, simply backing out of it would deal a serious reputational blow to the president. So in a way, Trump needs Zelensky, just like Zelensky needs Trump. And the degree of this dependence only increases with each passing day. But the initial logic of the 47th President of the United States of America is clear: to give up Ukraine and gain Russia to confront China. And no, don't think that I'm going to say that this is impossible, as many claim. Beijing was not an unconditional ally of the Russian Federation in its aggressive war, selling key drone components for electronic warfare and intelligence to Russia and Ukraine. Beijing blocked Russian bank payments, complying with Western sanctions. China carried out aggressive trade expansion in the now vacant Russian market, simply destroying local manufacturers. Well, buying Russian gas and oil at $12 below the market average can certainly be called allied assistance, but it's more like taking advantage of a prostitute who urgently needs to pay off a microloan. And everyone in Moscow understood and understands this. They understand it in Washington and even in Beijing. Just look at how they started to squirm after Trump's tariffs. Here's this policy article by the extraordinary ambassador of the People's Republic of China in Rossiyskaya Gazeta, which is the official print publication of the Russian government. Read the headline: "The international community must stand united against economic bullying by the United States of America." It's just that nobody in China wrote such articles when the sanctions only affected Russia. So Putin understands China has never been his ally in his bloody war, and the status of a cheap prostitute is clearly insulting to him. Listen.
And the Chinese, beginning to realize the new conditions and new challenges, I think now they will start the real process of preparing for a hot war with the United States of America over Taiwan. Because that's on their agenda no matter what. They just suggested that we be the first to take the heat in the conflict with Western hegemony in Ukraine. They supported us. I can't say anything against that, but it was rather detached. And now there's nowhere to go. That's when they started to act. And now it turns out that it's necessary to create a coalition against the West, that we need to help each other. When we were basically suggesting all this to rally around Russia, which challenged globalist hegemony, I didn't really see much enthusiasm from anyone, including the Chinese, who will now be fully in solidarity with China in a direct conflict with the United States of America. The answer is very simple. No one, absolutely no one.
And yes, you shouldn't see Dugin as just some weirdo. This is a man who has close ties with Steve Bannon. They even met in person. For the uninitiated, Bannon is an ideologue and Trump's Grey Eminence advisor during both his first term and unofficially in the second. Essentially, Steve first expresses all of Donald's ideas, but that's a discussion for later. Trump's strategy to distance Russia from China is effective and yields results. But a person whose knowledge of big politics is at the level of Ramzan Kadyrov simply can't be successful on the geopolitical chessboard by definition.
Spain is a Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa country. Do you know what a Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa country is? You will find out.
Yes, besides such negative qualities as an extremely low intelligence quotient, Trump is also simply a traitor. I'm sure that even in Moscow, Donald's actions toward Ukraine are seen as a betrayal of an ally at war. Who would want to deal with a person who shares such approaches? He will simply be used, but no one will want to do business with him. But that's just by the way. Of course, the main reason why Trump won't be able to pull Russia away from China is that the United States of America is a democracy. And no one can guarantee Moscow that the White House's strategy will remain in the long term. The future of the White House and Congress is uncertain. In 2026, there will be midterm elections for both the House and Senate. And while the Senate will almost certainly remain with the Republicans, it's quite possible that the Democrats could take the House of Representatives. At the very least, polls already show the Democrats leading their rivals by 1%. As Trump's presidency progresses, this gap will likely widen. After all, his trade war, which could bring benefits in the long run, will undoubtedly affect the well-being of average Americans in the short term. And they, in turn, will express their dissatisfaction through voting. That's why, for me personally, the most important chart today is the one showing approval of Donald's policies. As you can see, it's gradually decreasing. Of course, we're only at the beginning, but something tells me that a person with a vocabulary smaller than Ramzan Kadyrov's will manage to mess things up quite a bit in the next year and a half.
If I were president, this war wouldn't have happened. Millions of people would still be alive. The cities would be open and thriving, and there would be beautiful towers in them. These towers were the most beautiful in the world, but they're gone now. They've been shattered to pieces, lying on the ground, broken into millions of fragments by missiles, bombs, and bullets. This is undoubtedly a war that began well over 4 years ago. It was never close, and no one even considered it.
So Trump won't be able to separate Russia from China. On the contrary, their alliance will only grow stronger. Actually, we're already seeing this happen. After all, only now have Moscow and Beijing gotten the chance to realize their main idea, to divide the world between the two of them, where Putin will dominate in Europe and China in Asia. No one could have imagined that such an opportunity would be handed to them on a silver platter this century. The European Union, realizing that their overseas brother is no longer a guarantor of their security, will be forced to move closer to China, so that there is at least some chance to influence Putin's plans to start a war with the countries of Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, who recently called Xi Jinping, was even forced to change her tone toward the great chairman. If earlier there were reproaches for cooperating with the Russian Federation, now it is a request to step up peacekeeping efforts. For Beijing, this is a heavenly gift. The European Union had been slowly reducing its reliance on China, from cooperation on various infrastructure projects and the reduction of mutual direct foreign investments to the simple decrease in imports from China.
Take a look at the chart.
And now the European Union is discussing the resumption of the dialogue that was suspended, the dialogue about trade preferences, which means Europe and China will be forced to move closer together.
During the phone conversation, the importance of stability and predictability was emphasized, as well as the responsibility of the European Union and China as two key trade players. The President of the European Commission emphasized the need to support a reformed, open and fair trading system based on equal conditions, especially in light of the tariff restrictions from the United States of America.
But it's important to note that even in murky water you can catch fish. Now, the European Union really needs Ukraine to be included in its security architecture. If before, some European countries just sympathized with Kyiv, let's say, without getting off the couch, now when Trump doesn't guarantee their security, it has become obvious to them. The only thing that separates European children playing on the playground from an Iskander missile is the thin front line held by Ukrainian heroes. So officially, Kyiv can and should play on this. Ukraine's European allies are increasingly investing in the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. If before they tried to invest money in their own production to provide their citizens with jobs, now that's clearly no longer the case. If even Belgium is now investing in Ukraine's defense industry, and Denmark is sending its troops to Ukrainian territory for training and to gain experience from the armed forces of Ukraine, then that's a clear sign that they may not be scared, but they're definitely not comfortable. And you can understand them. After all, even the very cautious German intelligence reports in its briefing that in the coming years, the Russian army will begin military actions against NATO members. The temptation to test the alliance's strength was great despite the Biden administration's weak position, a topic long under discussion. Well, and now? And yes, of course, Trump's pressure on the European members of NATO to force them to spend more on defense is absolutely the right move. But why is it done in such a way that it only provokes the aggressor? Instead of a clear ultimatum that would demand increase your defense spending to 2% as required by the NATO Charter, or else Article 5 of NATO will not apply to you. As soon as you reach these targets, we will defend every inch of your land. Instead of that, the man whose moral and willpower qualities are on the level of Ramzan Kadyrov comes out with this.
I'm very committed to Poland. Poland has a difficult neighbor, you know.
And what about the Baltic countries?
The Baltics? They have a difficult neighbor too.
The Baltic countries have exceeded their defense spending targets, but they have a tough neighborhood. Thanks for the info, Donald. In my videos, when I try to explain Biden's logic, I always get accused of being a leftist. It was hard for me to imagine a more absurd accusation. And not because I never shared the ideas of socialism or communism, but because I never justified old Joe's policies. I tried to figure out what paradigm he was operating in. All the steps taken by the previous White House administration and the alliance, which I emphasize was put together by Biden, fit into the paradigm of gradual confrontation. First Javelins, then High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, then Patriots, then Army Tactical Missile System, then F-16s. Each stage put the ball in Putin's court like, if you don't stop, we'll supply something else. And Putin understood perfectly well that every step he took would provoke a response. Like, in another year, Ukraine will have airborne warning and control system planes and long-range air-to-air missiles. They will soon target Russian aircraft and allow ballistic missiles to hit not just frontline cities, but Moscow as well. And that's a complete disaster. At the very least, it would paralyze all air traffic over most of European Russia, because there would be a serious risk of shooting down your own plane while trying to intercept a ballistic strike. And yes, I've always called this approach criminal, because it was paid for with the lives of Ukrainian heroes. But would someone like Reagan, Bush, or even McCain have acted differently? I'm not sure. Russia's nuclear weapons were a factor, but Putin realized that prolonging the war also increased threats to his power. And now, thanks to Trump, this most important mechanism is gone.
If Biden hadn't been president in 2022, no other United States president would have made the decision to supply weapons in the volumes that Biden did. I have a lot of questions for him too, maybe even more than everyone else, but you have to give him credit. If he hadn't been president, we'd be in deep trouble. Well, if it had been Obama, for sure. Anyone else, believe me.
Trump's actions are not only prolonging the war, but also creating the conditions for a much larger conflict in Europe. Moreover, as I already said, thanks to Donald, Putin is getting more room to maneuver. They can pause the bloodshed in Ukraine and try to politically divide the Ukrainian nation through elections. If they fail to divide it, they can resume hostilities at any moment. After all, the peace plan that Donald Trump is imposing on Ukraine isn't even capitulation. It's accepting the status of a country that will forever live under the threat of another attack from the aggressor. The Ukrainian people, who have sacrificed so much in this war, still aren't receiving any security guarantees from the West. The idea of deploying a coalition of the willing's military contingent faces a major problem. Will the United States guarantee their security? And it seems that lately there has been some progress on this issue, but how things will turn out in the end is still unclear. In any case, all attention is on this chart, and here's why it's so important. Apparently, the more often Trump fails in his initiatives, whether it's tariffs, Iran, Israel, or the economy, the more the Reagan-era Republicans start to assert themselves. Even Lindsey Graham is already forming a coalition that's ready to increase pressure on Russia. I don't know if they'll be able to convince their patron that this approach is the right one. But there are still some rays of hope shining through. Just understand me correctly. Of course, I'm for a truce. Of course, the war needs to end. The only question is what mechanisms will be developed to prevent Russia from attacking Ukraine again? Will Trump give the coalition of willing countries security guarantees? Whether Allied troops will appear in Ukraine at all depends on this. Will the United States participate together with the Europeans in rearming the armed forces of Ukraine while the ceasefire is in effect? Will all sanctions on Russia be lifted immediately? Or will the process be gradual, with each stage tied to peace steps from Putin? What will happen to the frozen assets? Will they be given to the Russian dictator? Or can Ukraine count on these funds, which will be needed to restore its economy and defense capability? Depending on the answers to these questions, we will be able to understand whether Trump is acting in the interests of peace or in his own personal interests. But for now, as you can see, Donald is acting not as Agent Krasnov, but as an agent jerk. Actually, even such actions have a positive effect.
I think that if there is anything positive in what President Trump has said and done, which calls into question the commitments of the United States, it's that finally European countries like Germany have realized that they need to take on their fair share of the defense burden.
The Great Depression of 1929, which began in the United States of America, also seriously affected Germany, which was vitally dependent on American loans. The population's impoverishment and production decline created favorable conditions for the Nazis to gain power. In 2008, a global economic crisis broke out again around the world, which was compared in scale to the Great Depression. Since then, Germany has been extremely wary of debt, strictly following the rule of not taking loans to cover budget deficits. And this logic, enshrined in the debt break rule, was not changed for 15 years, only partially relaxed during the coronavirus disease period and briefly after the start of the full-scale invasion. But they finally decided to abandon this logic only after Trump came to power. Germany borrows $500 billion for the first time. Only this fact gives hope that the phrase Europe is waking up will not sound so ridiculous for the first time. After all, once again, now it's not about Ukraine but really about the security of Europe itself. Yes, of course, I boldly say Europe without specifying that it's a union of very different countries which look at the security situation in very different ways. But I'm talking about the countries that are the driving force of this alliance: Germany, France, the Scandinavian countries, the Eastern European Union states, and of course the United Kingdom, which has left the Union. All of them in one way or another are aware of how appeasing the aggressor ended. Will they take any steps to prevent this scenario? I don't know. But Germany coming out of its coma is somewhat encouraging.
Even we often chip in for the tickets that are supposed to bring the Colombians because we buy their tickets.
Do you buy tickets yourself for your fighters so they can fly to Ukraine?
Yes, many people ask. For those who can't afford tickets, we buy them ourselves. For this month, we already have 200 people. We're looking for money.
You have 200 volunteers from Colombia, and you can't bring them in because you don't have the money?
Yes, that's 200, what I'm planning for, but in a month I could bring in up to 2,000 people.
You know, throughout my, if I may say so, career, I've noticed one thing more than once. As soon as you voice an idea, people start discussing it, and in all sorts of circles. No, not because I'm an important opinion leader, but simply because that's how the information environment works. A thought spreads, gets supplemented, changes form, but most importantly, it gets discussed. These words from the commander of the assault company of the 47th Mechanized Brigade, Hamlet Avagian, are evidence that there is a way to solve the main problem in the armed forces of Ukraine, the problem of understaffing. I don't know if anyone in Europe will watch this video, but it will be dubbed in English. That's why I'm going to voice something that can truly change the balance of power on the battlefield. Europe urgently needs to start creating recruitment centers for those willing to go to Ukraine. If there are many willing Colombians and Kyiv either lacks the resources or administrative capacity to receive them, then this mission should be taken on by democratic capitals. People from many countries can volunteer to help defend Ukraine. As an incentive, both financial rewards and other types of encouragement can be used, such as citizenship for children or family members. Yes, I understand how that sounds. They have European bureaucracy over there. They can't deliver missiles for 3 years. I'm discussing mercenaries here. Well, first of all, mercenaries in Russia are fighting in an aggressive war on foreign territory. In Ukraine, they are contracted volunteers helping preserve state sovereignty. Europe may not do this. And the North Korean, Iranian, Syrian, Venezuelan, Indian, Chinese, and other mercenaries, or call them whatever you want, will come to their homes. And I'm not sure they will be ready to defend their home the way Ukrainians did.
The western territories of present-day Poland are a gift from Stalin to the Poles. Our friends in Warsaw have forgotten this. We'll remind them.
In October 2020, I released a video called From Karabakh Back to Donbass, where I confidently stated that if Trump won the upcoming elections that year, Putin would definitely reach his bloody hands toward Ukraine again. And I really didn't believe that the Kremlin dictator could start a war while there was a man in the White House who shared the values of that very old America. Yes, you can say whatever you want about Biden. And once again, I agree with most of the accusations. It was just clear that old Joe wouldn't turn a blind eye to the bombing of peaceful cities and call it a mistake. Unlike Trump, who is now accusing Zelensky of provoking the war himself. Yes, Donald is a man who sees the world in a completely different way, and if he had come to power in, say, the year 2000, it probably would have only benefited the United States, Europe, and most of the world. After all, of course, America, as the leader of the free world, has long needed reforms. But the problem is that his presidency happened during the most difficult era, an era of the collapse of the entire system of international relations. At this moment, taking such drastic steps risks falling into an abyss. Instead of shutting down the United States of America, it needed to be reformed. Instead of scaring NATO with the threat of the United States of America leaving the alliance, there should have been strict demands placed on its members. Instead of blanket tariffs against China, there should have been targeted duties coordinated with all allies. Instead of trying to appease the aggressor by weakening efforts to enforce sanctions, which now allows Russia to easily import dual-use goods, yes, sorry, that's personal, I know some of you are aware of this. And still, if you have important information about such schemes, I accept it in my chatbot on Telegram. As before, thank you all in advance. So instead of these concessions to Putin, it was necessary to draw such red lines that he wouldn't even dare to look beyond them, let alone cross them. Of course, I realize that videos, even if dubbed in English, are unlikely to change anything in the policy of the 47th President of the United States of America. Although it's worth a try, because in the States the final word still belongs to the voter, so I'll give it a shot. Well, as always, my friends, it's up to you to decide whether to be orthodox.